9 is a map that I have a bit of history with. Even from day one, when I hated Black Ops IV to an admittedly comical extent, I always thought this one stood out from the other maps in the game, but in a good way. Over time, I grew to like it more and more, but how does it hold up with almost 4 years of distance? Oh my god, it's already been 4 fucking years, are you serious? Well, without further deliberation, let's dive right into 9. Quick heads up, I will be playing in custom mutations for the majority of the video. Nothing too different, just highlighting shield parts because I have horrible mole vision, and enabling super sprinters from round 1. Oh, how you spoiled me, Cold War. First and foremost, we have the most important part of any map, its basic layout and design. Unlike many of its contemporaries, 9 is a fairly small-scale experience and is split into 2 main locales, the Coliseum and the connecting underground sections. The Coliseum features a largely symmetrical layout with 2 temples on each side of its main combat arena. Further contributing to the symmetry is that each of these temples house 2 wall buys, a perk statue, and a gong used to summon that temple's champions. As for the underground area, it's a slightly different story. It's incredibly claustrophobic feeling due to its numerous CQC tunnels, fallen objects blocking the player's path, and the zombie spawn points feeling designed specifically with the idea of giving the player very little room to breathe. It's much less pleasant down here, but because it's all connected to the temples above ground, it really helps the map flow super well. With the inclusion of the underground sections, you can get just about anywhere from anywhere. Do you need to head to the pack area? There's open doors on either side. Or how about one of the temples? Well, the entrance is just a few steps away. All without the use of teleporters too, which is a huge plus in my book. It may seem like a little thing, but the thing that makes me dislike the flow of maps like Forsaken, or to a much lesser extent, Revelations, is just how unnatural map traversal feels. If I want to go really anywhere, I have to teleport or zipline there. I much prefer maps where everything flows together naturally, and I can get anywhere on foot without the use of these glorified loading screens. 9 is absolutely perfect in this regard. In addition to serving as a great flow helper, the underground area houses 2 incredibly important utilities to make it necessary to occasionally venture down to mid-match: the Pack-a-Punch altar and this map's unique zombie shield variant, the Brazen Bolt. Because of just how important these are, it automatically balances out the underground section as a high-risk, high-reward type arena. I adore map designs like this, where there's safer areas, but they don't house all that many resources, so you don't gravitate there all match, alongside areas that are far more dangerous to traverse mid-round, but they have a ton of valuable resources, so you need to weigh the risk and reward before venturing in. In 9's case, this would be the main arena and the Pack-a-Punch temple respectively. Some other maps that do this well are Buried and Firebase Z. Most of Buried is a fairly safe experience, but then you have the Hedge Maze and Gazebo. Sure, the pack machine is down those steps, but there's also zero escape if you head down there mid-round. You have to fight your way out with whatever new weapon you just acquired. Or Firebase Z. Again, a largely safe experience, but Ravenov's hideout in the village houses an Ivan station, the Wonder Fizz, and Pack-a-Punch machine. To balance that out, it's super close quarters and there's zombie spawn points all over the place. If you're going there mid-round, you better be prepared. Again, risk, reward. Or just use an Aether Shroud if you're boring. But that's a topic of balance for another day. Another important element of the map is the initial setup and how the map design feeds into it. 9 starts players out in the main combat arena and presents them with 4 paths, but only 2 of them are accessible, one to the Danu Temple and another to the Ra Temple. Inside each temple, there's a gong that'll summon that temple's champions, which serves as a great way to organically introduce the player to the map's new enemies. Defeating them will give you a sacrificial head that'll later be used for the Pack-a-Punch altar. Progressing down through the temples will lead into underground sections that connect the entire map together. It's here that you'll find a backdoor entry to the previously locked temple doors and meet the other 2 sets of champions. Defeat them, open the Zeus and Odin doors, and take the heads down to the pack area, and you're all done. Seems simple and uneventful, right? Well, that means the designers did their job right. The most important element to making this initial setup seem so simple and natural is something you wouldn't expect: locking the doors to the Odin and Zeus temples. I think that's genius. Simple, yes, but genius nonetheless for one specific reason. It funnels the players into exploring the entire map without feeling overbearing. Locking these 2 doors forces the players into really taking in their surroundings, which is super important because, for those first couple matches, Zombies really is all about discovery. Finding all the utilities, learning how the map flows, identifying dangerous choke points, all that jazz. If all 4 doors were immediately accessible, you could just open one, defeat the tower's champion, repeat the process 3 more times, and have all the heads for the Pack-a-Punch way earlier than you normally would, and you never would have had to explore the rest of the map. Some players might not have a problem with that, but I personally believe that the Pack-a-Punch machine should always be left for the very end of a map's exploration. Derice, 5, Mob of the Dead, Garrod Crovey, Raven the Redwoods, and the Final Reich. Despite some of these maps being from different directors and even entirely different studios, each of them subtly guides the player through the entire experience through their Pack-a-Punch unlock methods. So by the time you actually gain access to the machine, you're familiar with the play space. Essentially, pack setups like this act as a tutorial for the players, and unlocking the machine is where the game lets go of your hand and says, alright, you got everything you need, now go kick some ass. Now, back to 9. Another thing that helps with the initial setup and exploration is the fantastic use of colors to guide first-time players. Here Rizzo goes again talking about color direction. Yeah, I know, get it out of your system, but come on, Treyarch Zombies and Blundell's maps in particular are really great at this. Their colors are so expertly utilized to guide first-time players without hand-holding. And for those of you that maybe don't know what I'm on about, here's some examples. See the lanterns on the walls in the Danu Tower? At first, they just seem like cool set decorations, but they're actually super important to first-time progression. Because they're far brighter than anything else in the environment, they naturally catch a player's eye and, like a moth to a flame, subconsciously leads them down into the temple to explore. Or how about the lights near the Brazen Bull workbench? They stick out compared to everything else around them, so you go check them out and see additional parts required, which lets first-time players know that they need to go on the hunt to build something. Or one last example, the flickering of the fire in the Zeus temple. Odin temple. Because the light can be seen flickering on the wall as you approach, you naturally move in to investigate the area. By doing stuff like this, the game is essentially guiding you through the map in a way that lets you feel like you're discovering everything on your own, even though you're going down the exact path the designers wanted you to. One of the hardest parts of game design is leading a player into areas the designers want them to explore without having it feel like they're having their hand held, which, for as much as I love the game and its core systems, and will probably never shut up about how much I love it, Cold War definitely got wrong. While the objective markers and all that are great for onboarding those that have literally never touched the mode, the setup in those maps feels far too handholdy for anyone familiar with how Zombies works. Funnily enough, every single map in Cold War was actually designed to lead the player through lighting and props, which can actually be seen by playing the game without the HUD. But then all of that hard work was undermined by just putting objective markers over every single door. Like, yes, I get it, thank you. Moving on from the setup and map design, let's talk about all the funny little critters that inhabit the arena. In addition to the returning Catalysts and Blightfathers, 9 throws a handful of new, period-appropriate special enemies into the mix. Among these inclusions are 2 very well-designed heavy units, the Marauders and the Destroyers. Starting with Marauders, they're fast-moving brawler-type enemies that could perform standard slash attacks with their wrist-mounted blades, or leap at the players and unleash a fury of high-speed swipes. If you're unlucky enough to take the entirety of one of these jump attacks, you'll take up to 250 damage in a second, which is more than enough to kill you from full health if you don't have armor. This sounds pretty impressive on paper, right? But the tell for a Marauder's jump is very well telegraphed ahead of time, so as long as you're paying attention to your surroundings, all you need to do is sidestep it a bit, which, in turn, opens the Marauder up to uninterrupted attack. As for the Destroyers, they're much slower heavy units, but to make up for their slow speeds, they can throw their battle axes at a player from a pretty considerable range. The windup for a throw is fairly telegraphed, and the actual travel time of the axe is pretty slow. So again, as long as you're paying attention, you'll be able to easily sidestep these attacks and make short work of them. Shooting off one of their arms will completely disable this attack and force them to become enraged melee combatants. Taking off both arms will instantly kill them though, regardless of how much health it actually had left, which I quite like personally. It rewards accurate fire instead of just mindlessly dumping mag upon mag into its chest or its head. So despite their differences in attack patterns, Destroyers follow the same pay attention and you'll be fine design approach of Marauders. I love this approach to special enemies where there's very obvious counters to each one of their attacks. But because they deal so much damage, you have to play by their rules for a bit and give them attention instead of just viewing them like normal fodder enemies. Basically, you need to respect the AI in a way, if that makes sense. Let me just list off some examples real quick. pre-patch Scobalula from Vanguard, you had to constantly stay on the move while she was around to avoid her energy eruptions. But because she had an immunity phase, you couldn't just instantly delete her from the field. Or Dead of the Night's Crimson Nosferatus and Firebase's Mimics. You need to keep both of them at a distance or they'll grab you and bite you like Fredbear FNAF 4.
What the fuck?
Now, as well designed as these special enemies are, I'd be lying if I said their implementation was perfect. The one thing that bothers me just a little bit is that the game has absolutely zero restraint with them. In higher waves, you can have multiple destroyers and marauders, a handful of catalysts, and a Blightfather all on the field at once, alongside super sprinter zombies if you manage to get past round 50. However, despite this sounding really bad, it isn't actually too big of an issue. I did say it only bothered me a little bit after all. Like the special enemy spam in Forsaken, this isn't exactly broken per se, it's just a tad annoying to deal with at times is all. The reason it isn't broken in these examples compared to something like Exo-Zombies or the Beast from Beyond is that in Black Ops IV and Cold War, the player can become so powerful that as long as they keep their cool, they can easily deal with this kind of stuff. And more importantly, none of the enemy's counters conflict with one another. In Beast, you had to run from phantoms and slashers or you'd eat shit. However, the counter to ninjas is to not run. So when you had all of those on the field at once, you can see how that become a balancing nightmare. But in 9, the soft counter to every enemy, as we discussed, is the same. Move. If you stay on your feet and have decent reaction time, you'll be just fine. Like I said, it can just be a bit annoying at times to have 400 things around at once. But again, not broken. And one last thing before moving on from gameplay, the quest events. The quest itself is terrible, which we will certainly get into, but that doesn't stop it from having some fantastic set pieces. The first is the Cleansing, where you get teleported to a darkened, almost dreamlike version of the Danu Tower and have to cleanse the blight from the Tree of Danu. Or later on, the Gladiatorial Storm. Here, you're locked into the center ring with infinitely spawning gladiators and tigers that only gets more oppressive as the timer ticks down. But to deal with it, you're given an unlimited charge of your special weapon. It's not particularly difficult, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a ton of fun. And of course, the boss fight where you face the champions of the 9. 2 massive zombified war elephants with gladiators riding atop throwing fiery arrows down on you. Again, not particularly difficult, but the scale and soundtrack does such a great job at getting you invested in what's going on, and makes for a really fun experience. With gameplay covered, this next chunk, I suppose, is going to be dedicated to all the specific elements that help sell the map's environment, because god damn does this map feel alive. Starting off with the most immediately obvious is the art direction. Taking place in 80 BC roughly, 9's setting is unlike anything ever seen in Call of Duty. And due to that setting, gone are the relatively modern styles of architecture we're so used to. Everything in 9 is ancient, lacks the sheen of other environments, and the very few man-made mechanical constructions on the map are incredibly crude, such as the spike and acid traps. Furthermore, there's a general feeling of savagery that permeates the entire arena. There's piles upon piles of corpses from previous trial attempts, bodies strung up on pikes around the arena, and even the champions of the gods have been tortured and suited up with ridiculous weaponry. A neat little detail about the champions is that they actually seem to retain some elements of the previous humanity, as they can be seen relishing in the cheering of the crowds when summoned to the arena. It might not seem like much, but in decidedly more action-adventure based takes on zombies like Chaos, I love it when my undead have a bit more personality and theatrical flair to them. Contrasting the derelict arena and the crowd's savagery though, are the places of worship. As you would expect from an extremist sect of religious fanatics like the Order, every single temple is fairly well kept, and through the numerous set decorations, from shrines to finely constructed lanterns, you get a sense of genuine adoration for the gods they worship. This isn't just a grift by some insane person, this is a set of individuals that truly believes in what they're doing. Further strengthening the setting is its lore. Alright, if y'all have been around my channel for any amount of time really, you know that I'm a huge lore junkie, like God, I love world building. Just inject that shit directly into my fucking veins. And 9 has no shortage of great world building throughout. There's sets of scrolls you can find that tell the story of 2 lost explorers who took the same vapor Scarlett and co did in their quest to find the Holy Grail, and some extra tales from the Oracle that give us some much needed backstory on the world of Chaos. Here, we're told exactly what prima materia is, and how a group of men known as the 9 kept its secrets locked away from the world due to how it was misused by those in power. However, they recognized that among the billions in the world, maybe some of them were worthy. So to find those among them worthy, they created the Sentinel artifacts and the Trials. Additionally, within some of the temples are murals that ultimately paint the High Priest of Chaos as a kind of messiah-like figure. When his people were at their lowest point, he led them to salvation through the discovery of prima materia. Even the utilities in the map have stories behind them, from the spike traps to the brazen bull shield. Through letters found in the map, we learn of an underappreciated craftsman named Remus who wants nothing more than to prove his talent to the High Priest. Without his master Tiberius's permission, he proposed the plans for the spike traps found throughout the map and earned the favor of the priest. But his real passion project was a shield he coined the Brazen Bolt. Through the transformative properties of prima materia, his shield could be powered up through melee kills with the included Qatar to unleash a devastating firestorm. Ultimately though, him stealing a stash of the element from the priest's personal quarters to test the shield ended up getting him killed because Tiberius is a fucking tattletale. But hey, he left us a great new zombie shield, so thanks Remus. Appreciate it. Further selling the environment, not just from a visual perspective, but a gameplay one as well, is the crowd affinity system. Indicated by a thumbs up on the lower left side of the screen, there's various levels of approval you can garner from the crowd through gameplay. If you play well, meaning that you don't go down, don't touch the fire, properly avoid tiger pounces, don't let your shield break, and, don't toss explosives into the crowd, your affinity will remain high, which in turn will result in the crowd throwing you high tier power-ups such as full powers and fire sales. I absolutely adore this inclusion, because not only do the constant fire sales make it easier to get set up, but it really helps sell the setting they're going for. Since in-universe this entire trial is a spectacle for the audience, it only makes sense that the contestants can win their favor, right? And finally, the thing that I personally really feel sells it all, more so than the little lore bits or the dialogue or crowd affinity, is the soundtrack and how it's utilized. You see, unlike just about every single Zombies map, 9 does something very special with its soundtrack. When you're underground, the music is normal. However, when you go above ground, the entire thing changes. No longer is it just a bunch of catchy tunes for the sake of the audience. It becomes a full-on in-universe presentation by the Order's cultists and the enraptured audiences in the stands. Like, when a new round starts, the Marauders will start banging on their drums, and the choir will vocalize alongside the crowds. Or when a special round starts, the underscore will change to that of a chanting crowd. But by far, my favorite example of this has to be during the boss fight with Fury and Wrath. The crowd becomes absolutely enamored with the events on display, and really starts getting into it. The choirs vocalize way more intensely, and whoever's on the trumpets is doing a fantastic job. All of what I discussed in the past few minutes, but especially this detail, really helps you get invested in the world around you in a way that few Zombies maps ever have before or since. They really didn't have to go that extra mile, but they did, and I absolutely love it. And to wrap up the good, here's a collection of tiny little details that I really appreciate. If a player is having trouble with their challenge banner, a teammate can actually contribute to help them out. During the quest, max ammos are dropped constantly so a player doesn't get stuck. It may not seem like a big deal nowadays, but remember stuff like Revelations where you could throw all your Arnies into the Apothecan's funny holes and you weren't guaranteed to get an ammo drop from the Margwas? Yeah, that was fun. When poisoning the mystery box for the Death of Orion side quest, it actually has unique effects that aren't used anywhere else on the map. It would have been super easy to just tint the pre-existing effects green, but someone went the extra mile for this. The little Easter eggs are really cute in this map, like the one where if you throw a homunculus into the crowd, they'll do the wave. Or how about the one where Destroyer performs a guitar solo with his battle axe during special waves?
But I'm a creep. I'm a weirdo.
Good stuff. And finally, this one is 100% just for me. But the Raw artifact, despite never making a physical appearance in the map, is actually still loaded into the game's memory and can be extracted. Like Samantha's Firebase Z trailer skin, I love when stuff gets left in unintentionally for silly little render gremlins like myself. With the plethora of good things covered, it's time we cover the stuff that just doesn't work. First and foremost, we have the map's wonder weapon, the Death of Orion. Shooting it normally is pretty much worthless, but when charged, the little guy will fire a beam that freezes any enemy it hits and will slow all targets surrounding that initial enemy. In addition to slowing them down, it'll do damage to them over time, making anything caught in the beams easy pickings. Now, putting aside its power and the fact that it's literally just a cute little scrunkly, I've never personally been a fan of weapons like this. You know, the fire and forget weapons that'll do all the work for you, or have super delayed effects. For the former, the Apothicon Servant comes to mind. Just shoot a hole down and that's it. There's no extra skill involved or anything like that. And for the latter, the Bloodthirst Tesla gun from World War II Zombies comes to mind. It's super powerful, but it actually takes a couple seconds to kick in. The only time I've ever liked one of these delayed effect kind of weapons was the Face Melter in Spaceland. And that's only because, how can you not like a weapon that literally turns a zombie into a rocket ship? God bless them goofy IW folk. It's a shame they all left. Another point of contention is the sound and animation work. Like the Die Machines in Cold War, there's no real power behind the weapon when you shoot. Let's look at some of the best examples of powerful feeling weapons real quick. BO2's Blundergat, BO3's Thunder Gun, World War II's Tesla Gun, and most recently, Vanguard's Ray Gun and Decimator Shield. All of these weapons, in addition to being really powerful, just feel great to use. Now, let's look at the Death of Orion. Like I said, it's super strong and is really great at area denial, but there's no real power behind these shots, which makes it so much less fun to use. Kinda like the KT-4, it's unfathomably strong, but also really low on my wonder weapon tier list due to its lacking sound design. I know some players are purely focused on how strong a weapon is, and that's totally fine. You'll probably love the Death of Orion. But for me, it's not just about how well they can wipe out a crowd of enemies, but how satisfying it feels to wipe out that crowd. So for people like me, this one is unfortunately kind of a miss. Moving on from the wonder weapons, let's talk about one particular special enemy that keen-eared listeners might have noticed I left out earlier, the Tigers. In contrast to the well-designed, if admittedly overabundant gladiators and catalysts, these things are indefensibly terrible. For those unfamiliar, Tigers have very low health, their normal melee attacks only deal 40 damage like a Hellhound, but they have a much scarier attack where they pounce at the player from a distance, and if they land it, they deal a massive 100 damage. Now, in theory, that doesn't sound too bad, right? As long as you're paying attention, you should be able to avoid them, right? Oh, you sweet summer child. Their pounce attack is so poorly coded that they can curve while in mid-air to get you. So even if you made the right play and slid away from their attack when you saw it gearing up to pounce, you still will get punished because it can change trajectory mid-flight. Even worse, it can curve around other zombies to hit you. What I mean by this is, let's say you have a crowd of zombies and a tiger at the back. You would assume that because there's so much in the way, you're safe from a pounce, but they can still jump from the back, curve around all those zombies, and hit you. I cannot even begin to tell you how many unfair downs I've taken from this. For comparison, Plague Hounds and Cold War Zombies had the exact same problem for the longest time, but they were eventually fixed almost a year after launch. Tigers, however, had no such luck. Speaking of launch, does anyone else remember how miserable that was? You only had 150 health, and the Tigers that weren't programmed properly could fucking one-shot you. The epitome of great game design right there. To be fair, they did tone their damage down a bit after launch though, so they're no longer this unholy travesty that makes me wonder if the entire medium was a mistake, but instead, just a huge pain in the ass that's kind of a blemish on a great map. And the last bullet point on my fairly short list of gameplay issues is the main quest. In spite of some really great moments like the cleansing of Danu, the gladiatorial storm, and a genuinely fun boss fight with an impressive sense of scale, everything connecting these cool moments is unbearable. Not only is there a ton of round burning early on in the quest, which, for the unfamiliar, basically just means do a thing and wait a round or two until progressing. The actual quest steps are the same old poorly communicated, annoying song and dance routine that we've been getting since Ascension, with notable exceptions like Mob of the Dead and Dreisendrache, of course. I think you could reasonably get through those maps without a guide. The best example of poor communication comes from the very first step. After unlocking Pack-a-Punch, you need to activate your special weapon next to a skull in this room. Which skull? It's right there. You see? Now, let me just ask, in what fucking world is a casual player gonna know what to do? Literally, how would they even come to the conclusion that you need to find a specific skull and pull out your special weapon next to it? The game gives you zero indication to do that. There's no point A to point B sense of progression. Instead, it starts with point 4 and jumps to point Q. If that makes zero sense, that's exactly how it feels to do a pre-Cold War Zombies main quest without a guide. Now, you may say, okay, but the quests are supposed to be super hidden. That's just what Zombies is. To which I respond, yeah, it fucking sucks. Back in the old days where Zombies was still pretty mysterious and low-key with its actual story, and gameplay was the main focus, think Ascension to Buried. That was okay. I mean, I personally still didn't like it, but at least it made sense back then. Hitting quests for a hidden, yet not super important story. Hell, it kind of fit the mysterious air the mode had back then. But that's not what Zombies was under Blundell's direction. It took on a much more narrative-heavy approach where the story and character was at the front of the experience, which, again, is totally fine. Hell, it's more than fine. We got these awesome intro cinematics to set up each map, tons of interesting character work, and each location had its own unique story to tell while also propelling the main narrative forward, which was great. But then, you go and hide almost all of that narrative in your narrative-heavy mode behind the most illogical, inaccessible steps that only the most hardcore players would ever find. Like, you can't do that.
You can, but don't!
You might be wondering why I've brought up the casual player base so much. Well, two reasons. One, casuals are, and always have been, the lifeblood of COD Zombies. Seriously, talk to anyone in the know about player numbers and engagements on certain maps and modes, you'll be fucking astonished by the results. We severely overestimate just how important the YouTube and Reddit side of the community actually is. And two, if you saw the allegedly leaked design documents for Revelations that allegedly said it was meant to be a definitive end for Aether and nothing was supposed to come after it, and combine that with the allegedly leaked early builds of Black Ops IV that allegedly show that Chaos was developed way before Aether was, allegedly, you can tell that Chaos was originally supposed to be a new beginning for everyone, hardcore and casual alike. But it wasn't. Why? Well, I obviously can't prove it, but I have a feeling that stuff like this, along with releasing the maps out of order, was yet another reason why Chaos failed to catch on with casual players, and it's exactly why I think Dark Aether resonated so strongly with those same kind of players. It's me. I'm those kind of players. For better and for worse, Dark Aether's quests were, largely, something that most players could figure out, and that feeling of logical point A to point B discovery without needing to look up a bloated guide, alongside discovering stuff like radios and intel artifacts, hook them. When you are discovering things yourself, you're more likely to get invested in figuring out a game's mysteries and its story. It's just basic game design. New players didn't get that same hook with Chaos, because unless you were following some bloated Easter egg guide on YouTube, you weren't getting through these fucking maps. And when you did eventually cave, it didn't feel like an exciting journey of discovery. It felt like exactly what it was. Some admittedly cool moments strung together by weird steps you had to look down at a guide for every 3 minutes. Now don't think I'm just conjuring this up out of nowhere to shit on Blundell's maps. Nah, I still really respect how he and his team pulled Zombies back from the brink in Black Ops II, and the larger scale narrative experiences really helped reinvigorate the mode for veteran players. But there was a very telling interview that came out around the time of Firebase Z. In it, the designer said that less than 2% of all players ever did the quests, hence the decision to move more towards straightforward ones for Dark Aether. People may blame Cold War and even Vanguard for the mode's decline in popularity, but I genuinely feel like BO3 and BO4 did way more damage because those games were literally made for the 2%, you know, the YouTube and Reddit side of things. It was cute in BO3 because it was this cool new thing, but eventually there came a point where even longtime fans like myself were like, holy shit, can you just be a normal video game, please? And to bring it all full circle, for most of those fans, that point was Chaos. Hence, one of the many reasons why it just didn't catch on. Now, before moving on, we have to talk about Scarlett. Oh man, I genuinely cannot express in words just how much I hate this kind of character. You know the kinds I mean, the ones where the writers realize, hey, our series hasn't had the best female representation up to this point. which in COD's case is pretty on point. So then they overcorrect super hard and end up making a character that's incredibly angry, has almost zero flaws, and then they pair that already unappealing combination with some of the most try-hard dialogue you've ever heard.
Let me guess. It's my perfume, right? Oh, yeah. I don't fucking wear perfume.
Jesus. Now, let me be clear on two things real quick. This kind of character sucks regardless of gender. It's just so much more prevalent in female characters because a lot of writers simply don't know how to write strong women. Additionally, I have zero problem with strong badass women that could kick my ass. Yep. But for real, characters like Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, Ellen Ripley in Aliens, Sidney Prescott in most of the Scream movies, Cereza and her wife Jean in the Bayonetta games, or a much more topical example, Kim Wexler from Better Call Saul, are fantastic examples of strong, yet human characters that will stand the test of time. Scarlett Rhodes aims for this same status, but like Polina Petrova in Vanguard, hilariously misses it for a multitude of reasons. The most annoying being that we are constantly told how strong and independent she is through her abrasive, cunty attitude, instead of being shown through her actions. This is one of the classic, insufferable pitfalls of writers trying way too hard that ultimately makes their characters come off less like a strong, capable leader and more like an incredibly insecure caricature of one, which would be a-okay if that's what they were going for. But there are zero signs of it being an act, and every character around her is constantly extolling her virtues like she's top shit. She's a fantastic inventor, she's super pretty, everyone likes her for some reason, and she has no weaknesses. Another huge reason this character doesn't work is the general tone of Chaos. In stark contrast to Blundell's run on Aether, Chaos is a fairly lighthearted experience overall, and the rest of the cast reflects that tone. Diego and Shaw have a lot of comical banter with the zombies and villains alike, and while Bruno may be a bit more serious than those two, his dry comedy never ceases to make me smile. And of course, lest we forget how silly the Dead of the Night cast got at times.
Looks like I'll be riding shotgun, eh? Eh? Oh, I slay me.
Brian Blessed is a national goddamn treasure, so to shove in this angry, brooding character alongside such a light experience causes a huge tonal clash. So with the negative attributes of this character covered, I'd like to compare her to another Call of Duty character that actually nails exactly what Scarlett missed so badly. Scarlett Rhodes. Yeah, funnily enough, since there was such a massive gap between 9's release and Ancient Evils, the writers took all of these criticisms that fans had to heart and drastically improved her. Here, she's much less abrasive and more honest with her emotions when the action dies down. They even made her overcompensation into an actual character trait. While talking with Diego, she admits that she's so abrasive as a bit of a shield, which makes sense. She did grow up without a solid father figure after all. Oh, right! She actually talks with her compatriots like they're people, not objects that are beneath her. Which technically you could argue that was her arc from the beginning, but it's such a hard shift from the other maps, and it happens so unnaturally that it comes off as course correction. Another improvement made to the character is that her leadership capabilities are no longer insisted on us through dialogue, but shown through her actions. Just look at the cutscenes in Ancient Evil, whether it's roping down into Delphi, entering the Oracle's temple, or going through the portal to fight Perseus at the top of Olympus, she's always the first one through the door, even in front of the absolute man mountain that is Bruno Delacroix. Ancient Evil's portrayal of Scarlett is far stronger than her initial incarnation, and proves what I was getting at earlier with those seemingly unrelated and scattershot examples. You don't need to make your characters standoffish, arrogant, emotionally closed-off cunts for them to be strong. Just write them as people. They can be great, self-sufficient leaders, but can also be warm, caring, and vulnerable too. It's a very hard balance to pull off, but Ancient Evil Scarlett is way closer to this than her previous appearances, and I genuinely would have liked to see this version of the character again in future maps. But Activision pulled the plug on that story real fucking quick, which is just a shame. And finally, before we wrap up, we have the Nitpicks. My absolute favorite segment because I get to talk about a bunch of shit that doesn't matter in the slightest. The eye glows on tigers don't actually appear on their eyes. Instead, they appear on their tag origin joint. How does this even happen? The crowds in the stands look a little not great. I know the models had to be optimized to maintain performance, but
Jesus.
When a marauder attacks after a jump, their attacks can hit you if you're behind them. This is because the attack is actually a bubble around the marauder instead of in front of it. Marauders and destroyers count towards the round count, so because they move slowly when not in combat, the pace of the round can be slowed to nothing as you spend a solid minute trying to find out where that motherfucker went. When killing a tiger with a Reaver crossbow, its model disappears instantly and then plays the exploding effects. At the back of the Zeus Temple Bridge, you can see the Geometry Z fighting. The crowds at the very top of the stands aren't actually animated, they're all in a T-pose, which can almost never be seen, but pull out a sniper rifle and there we go. I know I bring this one up almost every time, but Blightfathers and Catalyst don't show up in theater mode. I understand that theater mode is super low priority in the development process, hence why it wasn't included in Cold War, but you guys really never fixed this? If you kill a destroyer quick enough by shooting its arms off, its battle axis will still float in the air as if its arms were still there. Throughout the entirety of the outro, Scarlett is missing her face paint texture. Another outro nitpick. When the executioner raises his axe, his actual character model disappears for a few frames before the shot cuts. So, in conclusion, 9 may have a couple issues, and its quest still suffers from the nonsensical steps that have plagued the mode since 2011, but what it does offer in return is an incredibly fun, surprisingly accessible experience for veterans and new players alike, as well as one of the most well-realized, unique settings in Call of Duty history. If you just want to jump into a Black Ops 4 map and have fun, 9 and Classified are ones I cannot recommend highly enough. Well, that's all for today. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, might I be so bold as to recommend my look back at Origins, Alpha Omega, the rest of BO4's maps, or my season-wide coverage of Cold War Zombies. Or, if you're in the market for something not related to zombies, I wrapped my Persona 3 retrospective back in early August, and look, I really don't like to toot my own horn because it can make me sound like a conceited cunt, but goddamn am I proud of how that one turned out. It's easily my best work yet, and I think it's going to be a long time until I make something that good again, if I'm completely honest. Links to all of those videos will be in the description if you're interested. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.